And today we're going to be taking a look at taking our rocks which we sculpted within ZBrush using that Megascans method from my previous video and texturing them within Unreal Engine. This does not require Substance Painter, doesn't even require you to unwrap the mesh in an external 3D programs. As we know, unwrapping these dense meshes could sometimes be time consuming, sometimes it could just crash even. So this is a more foolproof way of preventing that, as well as creating layered details within the mesh. And with this process, you can use it for these sort of assets. You could really use it for pretty much anything, but it does really work well with large assets. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So here we are in Unreal Engine, and I adjusted this material just so we could better see what's going on here. So the fact that it looks like a bruised melon, don't don't think too much into that. But as we can see here, as I scale it, the details sort of stay where they are. It's world aligned, so the actual texture size doesn't stretch or anything. If you're someone, by the way, that works in virtual production or is looking to get into virtual production, creating something that is world aligned, if even initially during like the blockout phase, is really helpful, especially as you're trying to figure out the actual texture size of an asset. Even as like a first sort of pass before you do a final pass, could be very useful. Personally, I like to use world aligned textures. And so first, let me just sort of break this down, and then we'll jump into it. So what's going on here is we are we're using the matte 10 layer blend function, and we create some material functions. This one for the base, just keep it simple, or you could use the Megascans for it, and we have a switch for it. And then we also have the masks, and the masks are really doing the brunt of the work here, um, in for the texturing. So they're split by component masks and world align. So let's dive into this. So before we go ahead and just create the material, first thing we need to do is create the mask. So if I open up the one I have, we have this sort of cliff texture, then we have this splotchy sort of, you know, whatever this is, and then we have this more linear or directionally laid out sort of pattern as well. You could get a lot more precise with this. I sort of just threw these in. This initially started just as a test, to be honest, but then it ended up just working for the scene, so I just kept it. But yeah, so in order to create this mask first, what we need to do is jump into Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop, and I brought in 3 different textures. These are all from Megascans. These first 2 are imperfections, so if you go to Megascans, search for imperfections, that's where these are. And then this is just the ambient occlusion from one of the cliff textures. And so we have these 3. You could use these individually, but we want to channel pack them. So we want one to be red in the red channel, one to be in the green channel, one to be in the blue channel. So the way in which we do that is, let's go ahead and take this and we're just going to drop it into a group. So folder, we're going to name this one R or red. We could change the color if we want. And then we're going to do the same for the other 2. So this one will be green. Change this to green. And then this one will be blue. Now, the naming of this doesn't necessarily matter. It's more so for the sake of keeping things organized. And so what we need to do, first we need to make sure that the folders are all set to pass through. So that's great. And then we're going to right click, go to blending options, and then where it says fill opacity. So for the red channel, we're just going to have it on the red. On the green channel, we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to set it to green. And then on the blue channel, we're going to do the same thing, but set it to blue. All right, and so now we have our various different masks. They're set up in the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. You could add your contrast here. However, I like to have that control within Unreal Engine. If something is a bit too egregious, Maybe it's a bit too blown out in the white sections or a bit too dark in the black sections. Those are things that you probably should level out within Photoshop, just to keep it within the same realm that it probably should, within the same sort of balance. But for right now, we're just going to leave it as is, so red, green, blue, and then all you're going to do is export that. And then after you export that, I'm going to open this, I'm going to find where I place that. Okay. And so once you bring your texture in, make sure that the compression setting is set to masks. Me also, I like to set my masks to no bitmaps. So if we go back and change it to from texture groups, you see it gets a little bit blurry, it's a little bit more pixelated. And especially with this, if you get in closer and look at it, these details are now kind of blurred. And then we change it back to no bitmaps. And it just sort of fixed the masking for that, makes it a bit sharper. So that's my own preference, so make sure it's set to mask and no bitmaps. So how do we take that mask and how do we get it to this point? So let's go ahead, I'm going to create a new master material. So I'm just going to call this world align for right now. And so in order for this to work, what we need to do is we need to first, let's bring this in. So bring in our mask. Let's also just go ahead and put this material on here for now. So of course it's gray, we don't really have anything going on here. So within here, what we need to do is we need to separate this out. So first thing we want to do is create a world align texture. And then what we need to do, just copy, paste this, make this a convert to texture object, and then convert that texture object to a parameter. And I'm just going to name this mask. Sometimes when you do that, it changes the actual texture. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to just copy this, paste it back here. Already sets it to mask. This is going to be the texture object. And then texture size by default 64, 64, 64. I'm just going to use a scalar and call this mask UV. I'm going to set it to 512 for now. Or that might be a bit too. Let's do 128. 128. Okay. And then what we need to do after that, plug this into here. Okay, and then let me see how I have mine set up real quick. Okay, it won't even need to set that in there. Okay, cool. So from here, get rid of this. And then XYZ texture, we're going to put this into a component mask. And we want to mask off the red channel. We need to do this separately. RGB. So this one is going to be the green. This one is going to be the blue. And then if we look at these, if we preview the node, just to make sure it's working, okay, it looks like it's working. So we have this mask. So previewing node. We have this one, and then we have the other one. So so we have them all split out. Everything's looking good. From here, we're going to add a power node for contrast. You could also use cheap contrast. And if you're ever curious about what these functions do, you can just open them up, take a look at them. This is a great way to sort of learn the material nodes also, is sometimes just opening up the functions, because the functions will tell you what they do. And so you could sort of go through here and figure out how does it know to create these. But yeah, for me personally, I like, wrong one. For me personally, I like to use the power node. And so we're going to come in here, add our contrast, just set the default to 1. Plug this in here, plug this into a multiply. You can also just hold M and left click on the keyboard for multiply. And then this one will be our intensity. and set this to 1, like that. Okay, and then we're just gonna let's create some space here real quick. Okay, copy, paste, green, change the name, G contrast, G intensity, and then B contrast, B intensity. One thing that is important to note when you're setting up your channel masks for this workflow is the order in which these masks are laid out between the red, green, and blue channel is actually really important because the red channel is essentially going to be the bottom layer, and then of course the green is going to be second, blue is going to be third. You can change that in the 10 layer blend by plugging the red channel into like layer 3 or something, but for the sake of uh, for the sake of organization and yeah, I personally will just do, when I'm making these, red is going to be layer 1, green is going to be layer 2, blue is going to be layer 3. And then, if we need more layers, then we can always make, another mask. We can essentially duplicate this entire thing, use a second mask, and use that for 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. But yeah, so next thing I like to do is I like to group all of these. So under group, we can change this to mask, and this one we're going to put it in the mask group as well. Okay, so this is essentially the basis that's going to power our texture. What we need to do too is we need to set this to use material attribute. So now we only have the material attributes input going on right here. And the next thing we need is a 10 layer blend. And we're going to plug the blendable material into here. And we're going to go through and plug the masks into layer 1 mask, layer 2 mask, and layer 3 mask. So as you can see here, we have, baked normals. If there's a specific baked normals that you want to use, you can plug it into here. There's background. So the background is going to be the base layer. And then there's layer 1, layer 2, 3, so on and so forth. And if we open this, we kind of see what it's doing here a little. Well, yeah, we kind of see what it's doing here. It's essentially taking these standard matte layer blends, which essentially are a bunch of lerps. So if you like spaghetti in Unreal Engine, you can create these yourself and use lerps. Lerps are perfectly fine, but for the sake of ease and organization, I personally like to just use the matte 10 layer blend, even though we're not using the full 10 layers. You could do what I did here as well and create some switches. So if you want to use red, green, blue, maybe you don't want to use the green channel, maybe you just want to use 2 of these or something, you could turn one of them off. And to create that, essentially just a static switch parameter, use red. I use these on everything, so we could just v. This one would probably just make it to a constant, but for the sake of showcase, you just make this. If you don't want to use it, you just make it black so it doesn't produce anything. But you probably want to make it a constant instead of a parameter. But yeah, then instead you would plug this into here. So you could always do that as well, but for now, we're just going to leave it like this. Okay, so we have our mask set up, and as you can see in parentheses, it's parenthesis MA. That means it needs a material attribute. So you can't just come in here, unfortunately, and plug a color in. What you can do, if you wanted to create something more basic, you don't want to have a bunch of granular details, maybe it's just like a background mountain and you have masks for it or something, you can always use a make material attribute and just plug a color into here. And then now you can use, material 1, 2, 3, and you can add the various different colors. I use that for the background mountain that I created in here, actually. If it's still in here, let me see. Yeah, so if I open this one, then yeah, we can see that's exactly what I did. I just used a make material attributes, set the speculator to 0.5, roughness to 1, and I just use colors. That's basically it. For the mountain, this mask was a generated mask from Gaia, so I created that mountain in Gaia. And again, if we go through red, green, blue, we see the different sort of breakup in that. I will be doing a video later on about Gaia and creating landscapes and masks like this and how to use them and all that. But for now, let's stick with this prop material. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of these. And let's go back to this one. Okay, so let's assume we don't want a basic color for our shader. Let's assume that we want actual textures. So what we're going to need to do, let me save this. Okay. And so what we're going to need to do is create some material functions. So I'm going to create another folder in here, function test. Okay. And so in here, what we're going to do is grab under materials, we're going to grab a material function. And we're going to name this one layer 1. And then we're going to open it up. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with material functions, the way that I like to think of material functions, just to make it easier, is just think of them as like a container for your materials. It's a way of organizing your master material. You can do a lot of great fun stuff with the functions. But yeah, for sake of ease, I remember when I was first trying to fully understand what a function is, the way in which I helped that was first just thinking of them as containers. And for me personally, that seemed to help, so maybe it might help for you guys. The output name, we're going to name this layer 1. And you could technically just use one material function and create layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 as the outputs. Or you could do it just one function per each material. So the way in which we're going to put stuff in here. Now, this is where you are going to make your material. So if you have a specific material that you've made, or perhaps a material that you like to use, perhaps you downloaded something from the marketplace and it was a great material with functionality that you really enjoyed, you could just copy and paste all that in here. And this essentially acts as the material output node. So it essentially acts as this. And so in whichever material, if you're going to just copy and paste it, whichever node goes into this one, then that's the one that's going to, um, then yeah, then you're just going to copy and paste everything behind this node, and you're going to copy that, and you're going to put it into your function. Now, if, for those of you that might be new, that are maybe looking at a material and it doesn't have this, instead it looks like this, then what you would do is you would use a, whoops, not that one, use a, whoops, not that one either, you'd use a make material attributes, and you'd essentially plug everything that's in these pins, you'd plug them into this, and then copy everything, and then you'd plug this into your function output. So let me get rid of that. And that's actually one of the processes which we are going to be using. So what we're going to be doing, again, this is all for the sake of ease. So what we're going to be doing is coming in here to Megascans, and we're just going to grab just any of these, grab this, and you could technically just use this. However, the problem with that is you'd have to make different functions for the adjustments so that they don't overlap. So for me, I'm just going to grab all this. You could just grab the pieces that you want to use. Let's just grab all this. I'm going to clean this up a bit, but just for the time being, just copy, paste it in. You could technically just use this as is. So if you wanted to, you could just plug this in and then you just need to rename things. But for now, these need the textures. So for the time being, texture sample. Just gonna grab, or we could use actual textures. So let's already have this open. Bring these in. Put this in. Call this one layer 1 albedo. This one is going to be metallic. And this one is our ORM, occlusion roughness metallic. Specularity, I believe it was like this in here. Roughness, see, you can organize this a bit better, but let's just plug this into here. We don't need that. Wait, whoops. ORM. Scalar. Oops. Yep. Get rid of that. Ambient occlusion. Yeah, we could plug this in anyway. Ambient occlusion. And then the normal map. We're just going to plug this into all of these. So, no, personally, I don't like this. So I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of all of this. I don't like that roughness control either. This is just my own personal preference. I'm looking at this. It's like I don't really like these controls. Not all these controls. Some of them are great. I do like the specular one, and I like the albedo controls. The rest we're just going to kind of do. So we got this. We got the albedo, specular, and then the roughness. Again, I'm going to add a power. Plug that into here. Layer 1 rough contrast. Make that 1. Then again, we're going to plug this into a multiply layer 1 rough intensity. And then the normal vector parameter, layer 1 normal. And we're going to plug this into a flattened normal. I'm going to use a 1 minus to invert. So that the 1 minus node just inverts. And we need that because this is going to ask us for the flatness. And we want to use positive numbers. So if we wanted to increase the normal intensity, without this, we'd have to go into like -1, -2, and so on. So this layer 1 normal intensity, set that to 1. Okay, and from here, we can plug this into roughness, plug this into normal. Let's move this over here. Okay, and the next thing you need to do is just, oops. So you're going to want to make sure that everything is named properly. Oops, layer 1 underscore. So you copy and paste this, layer 1, layer 1, layer 1, layer 1, and then you want everything to be grouped in the proper layers. So I'm just going to grab all of these, group them into, oops. We're going to group these into layer 1. I spelled layer wrong. Layer. Okay. And then same for these textures. So group layer 1. The reason we want to do this is because if we don't name them properly, put them in the right groups, then what can happen is like this normal intensity, for example, it might end up controlling the normal intensity for like layer 2, 3, and so on. So that's the importance of naming it. And so we got layer 1 made. Let's plug that into this output, hit apply. Okay, and then what we're gonna do, come back here, open this. Okay, and then from here, all we need to do is take that function we made, that layer 1, and we just plug this into layer 1. You can make a specific one for background. Right now, I'm just going to use a make material attributes, and I'm just going to give it a color. So we got this. Let's just make it, that's going to be more orange, more orange. There we go. I'm going to give it a roughness value of 1, so it's not going to be shiny. And then same with specular, going to make it 0.5. Specular. Okay, background. Hit apply. Let's make this material instance now that we have something to show for it. So world align, material instance, put that on here. Okay. And so we can see we have our layer 1 controls right here. We have our masks. This one's set to global because we didn't change the grouping or the naming of that background layer. But then here, contrast intensity mask, mask UV, 512, 1024. So you can start adjusting these, and as we could see, the rock gets bigger, smaller as the mask sort of conforms around it. Now, the one thing that's going on, which we want to fix, is the tiling in here. So the tiling, we didn't really address the tiling, and so as we can see, the tiling isn't really conforming with the object. It's also not tiling, probably because we don't have anything in here for the UVs. So again, we're going to use world align texture. Gonna duplicate this. And you could just plug these in, but this is what we're gonna do. So world align normal. So for the normal map, you need a specific world align normal. You can't use world align texture. The system will definitely yell at you. You need a texture sample. I'm gonna copy this. Let's make this a texture object. Paste this. And then let's promote this to, whoops. Stop previewing. Paste that. Okay, now let's convert this to a parameter. And again, this is layer 1 normal. Paste that back in. Texture object. Texture set. Now for this, you could plug it into here. You could plug it in straight here as well. I don't know why, but I got into the habit of just plugging it into this. Again, you don't have to. It's kind of just, it works just either way. So whether you want to plug it into one of these or you want to plug it straight in, whatever you want to do. The other one, again, we're just going to create another text, or we could probably just copy paste this. Change the name first, otherwise it'll change this texture. So ORM. Again, we're going to take this, copy it, paste it, plug this into texture, XYZ texture, and then copy this, paste it, plug this in. This one will be layer 1 albedo. Or here, let's get rid of these. This into here. And then this one, we're going to copy it, paste it. For this one, we need a component mask. We need to mask off the green channel, plug that into here. And again, we're masking off the green channel because the green is the roughness channel. And then for this one, we're going to do the same thing, component mask. This we're going to mask off the red. For the specular, it doesn't really matter which mask, it just needs to be a gray mask. And then here, we're just going to plug this into this. Right. And then for the texture size, we're going to bring in a scalar and call this layer 1 UVs. And again, let's make this 512. Plug it into texture size, and the texture size. Hit apply. Wait for it to go. All right. And so now, oh, see, we need to group it. Layer 1, hit apply. There we go. Oh, these ones as well, because we made new ones. But layer 1, change to 128, 1024, 2048, 64. Man, so now we have the ability to control 0.25, 0.25. But now we have the ability to control the UV size for this as well. So 6, you can make it really big. We start to see it. But yeah, and then all you're going to do is you're going to essentially repeat that same process for layer 1. You're going to create a new function, and you're going to just change the names and the grouping to layer 2, layer 3, so on and so forth. The other thing you can do is you can take all of this, copy it, paste it, and so you can have just one big master function as well. Rename this to, layer 2, rename this to layer 3. And then again, all you would have to do, you don't even have to change the textures here quite yet, because you could always do that in the material instance, right? So all you would need to do is just change the names into, layer 2 or layer 3, group them into those layers. And then once you're done with that, you'd hit apply. And then we come in here. Now we see for the output, we have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. You could change the sorting priority of this. In order to do that, come in here, sort priority, whoops, 1, right? That should be 2. So this one is, bottom one is 3, this one is 2, this one is 1, hit apply. Okay, so then that 1, 2, 3. So you could do it with just one function like this as well. Just gonna hit apply. And because we didn't organize any of those, they're all still just using the layer 1 controls. But yeah, but now we have those 3 layers. You need to name them properly, group them properly. But yeah, after you just rename them, whether you do it this way or you do them in their own individual material functions, this is just a great way to texture large assets. As you can see, we didn't go in and UV unwrap anything. We didn't create any specific masks in Substance Painter. If those are things in which you want to do, by all means, this is also a great tool for that as well. If you're doing more procedural sort of texturing and you want to create masks within Substance Painter, then you can create those masks, and you can control the opacity, the intensity of those masks, and all that from whatever you bring from Substance Painter as well. Yeah, so I hoped this helped shine some light on how to texture these larger assets, how to create these masks. It's a great way of creating variation, especially again for larger assets, especially if they're really dense, if they're planned on being nanite meshes, and you don't want to go through the trouble of unwrapping them or hand painting them in Substance Painter or something like that. Again, you can just create masks, bring them in, and you'll get some breakup. And for things like large rocks like this, or for mountains like these, for example, if I come up over here, again, these masks were exported from Gaia, and the mountains are scaled a little wonky, so they sort of stretch back here. But you get the idea where there's this sort of breakup within the texture. Even though from our set it's sort of silhouetted out, you don't really see it. But yeah, so you can create custom masks, you can use tiled masks. Whatever works for you is ultimately what's going to work, right? So I hope you enjoy this video. I have some more coming out pretty soon, so stay tuned and I'll catch you guys.